All right, Brian, switching gears here. We're going to talk about just the college football landscape as a whole. And as always, we will at the end tie into what does this mean for Notre Dame? What does this look like for them? But it's been an ongoing discussion after we just watched the first ever 12-team college football playoff. Call it whatever you want, human nature, greed, I think all of those kind of fit. There's already discussion about making it bigger and making it better and finding different ways to make more money and all things that we have voiced our opinions about. However, there are going to be some changes, some that have been proposed and some that we do know that are coming down the pipeline here. But Brian, there are going to be changes to the college football playoff format. And we wanted to take the opportunity, because we've gotten a lot of questions about them, to break those down and talk through what those are. So, Brian, when you first start talking about these, what are some of the potential changes for 2025 and 2026 and beyond?
Well, what's interesting, Trevor, is there's two conversations going on simultaneously. One is attempts to change the 25 playoff, and the others are to change 26 and beyond. What makes the reason there's two conversations is because for the 25 playoff, there needs to be unanimous decision-making on anything that goes on. Starting 26 and beyond, the SEC and Big Ten have more say. They can bully the rest of the leagues to a much easier level, where if the ACC or the Big 12 objects to something right now, it's dead. You need everybody on board. So when you talk about expanding in 2025, not going to happen. When you talk about getting rid of the automatic qualifiers in 2025, not going to happen. It's unlikely that they're going to eliminate the 4 buys for the conference champions this year. I think there's understandable reasons why the Big 12 and the ACC don't necessarily want that to go away. I'm understandable of that. If you're going to have automatic qualifiers, period, then you should reward them with something beyond just getting in my opinion. And so I don't think you're going to find a whole lot of unanimous decisions now. But this is also where the ACC and Big 12, if they're smart, can give something for this year's playoff in order to get something for the 26 and beyond. Because if you hold firm and you just pretty much tell the Big Ten and the SEC to go F themselves for 2025, then there's no reason for them to have to work with you at all in 26 and beyond. They're going to let you have whatever say you're entitled to have in the new ESPN contract, which has already been signed, by the way. The format is still being worked out, but the deal has been signed. And so now it's going to come down to, okay, we'll work with you here if you give us some concessions for 26 and beyond. So we will get rid of the automatic bid, the automatic buy for the conference champs, and we'll just go to a pure seeding. So 1 through 4 gets the top 4 seeds. We'll give you that if you lessen the number of automatic bids that you guys get in the 26 and beyond. Right? We won't fight you on this if you only go to 3 automatic bids instead of 4. Or something along those lines. Those are things that if the Big 12 and the ACC are smart, they'll partner together and say, hey, this is how we can kind of work them a little bit. And the Big 10 knows that. They ultimately want to get a certain number of automatic bids. They're going to obviously start high. And if the other group of people they're negotiating with are idiots, then they'll get the 4 that they want. But they're going to be fine selling for another number. So that's part of it. Hey, we'll give you more, or we'll give you 4 if you agree to go to 16 and give us 2 each. Something along those lines. So there's still a lot of that to be worked out. And that's ultimately the biggest thing that's being decided, that's going to be decided over this next year, Trevor, is how many automatic bids does each league get? And when that's granted, what does that impact does that have then on conference scheduling and conference championships? There's been proposals along the lines of like the number 1 and 2 seed, or the number ones. I'm trying to remember what the SEC one was, but I think like number 1 and 2 would get automatic bids, and then like 3 through 6 would play in some sort of 2-round tournament at the end of the regular season to see who gets the 3rd and 4th bid, something like that. I'd have to go back and look at it again. I remember reading that yesterday. But how does that impact it? Because a lot of these teams are understandably saying, why are we playing in a conference championship? It only can hurt us. And if they get rid of the automatic bye, there's even less reason to play in the conference championship game. Because now it's like, okay, we go out and win the conference championship. We're not necessarily guaranteed a bye. yeah, we're locking in a spot, but we're probably in a 14 to 16 team playoff. If we make it to the conference championship game as the 1 or 2 seed, we're going to be in anyway. So we expose potential injury. We could maybe fall in the rankings. I mean, there's the incentive to do it is even less than what it used to be, especially with the unbalanced schedules in a 16 and an 18 team leagues. So it's not just the playoff that this is going to impact. I do think that you're going to potentially see some shifts to the conference championships as well. So that's what's being negotiated now is that. And I think couple things that I think we will see, unfortunately, the buys for the conference champions go away. And I know the pushback some people have, and I don't care. I think it's a very tired and lame argument to say, well, look what happened to Boise in the second round. Look what happened to SMU when they got in. Look what happened to, Arizona State got, whatever, and they got the 4 seed and they got beat. Well, so what? They played in overtime. And the whole Boise State getting a bye, that was so bad. Look what Penn State did to them. Well, look what Notre Dame did to Georgia. Look what Ohio State did to Oregon. Boise was way more competitive against Penn State than Oregon was against Ohio State. So it's like you have a narrative and now you're trying to fit the data into it. But I do think that's going to go away. I think there's some positives to that for the smaller conferences and some negatives. The negatives are you don't get bumped up in the rankings. That's a negative. You don't get that automatic bye into the second round. Chances are in a 14-team playoff, you're not going to get that anyway because there's only going to be 2 buys in a 14-team playoff. Most likely that's what's going to happen. Only 1 and 2 get buys, so it wouldn't matter for you anyway. So if you just go to a pure seeding standpoint, maybe Boise at 8 or 9 has a first-round game against a team that they've got a better shot at getting a win against than they would number 3 Penn State, that's ultimately what Penn State would have been, is what they would have been the 3 seed. If not, they'd have been the 4 seed. So instead of your first game being against the 8 or 9 seed or the 7 seed or the 10 seed, your first game is now against the number 4 team who happened to fall down to 6 because you and Arizona State were forced above them because of the conference championship game. So, there's always give and take. There's no perfect system, but I think that's what we're seeing is a move to that. And it's going to grow. It's not going to stay at 12 and it's not going to go fewer. It's going to get bigger. The question is, do they go to 14 or do they jump to 16? I think those things are all still up for debate, Trevor. But the big sticking point, the big stickler is going to be the number of automatic berths given to the Big Ten and the SEC. And how like Greg Sankey said something like he had just some really smart-ass remark that he made about, well, if I didn't care about the rest of college football, I would be doing this, this, and this. I really can't stand that guy. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, are they willing to they don't have to actually sacrifice anything. They can just bully the other leagues if they want to, but are they willing to make some sacrifices that are good for the entire sport and not only focus on what's going to be financially best for them? We'll see. At the end of the day, if they're smart, they're going to be like, listen, let's just agree to 3 and give them whatever, because most years in a 14 to 16 team playoff, we're going to have 4 in anyway. I mean, Ohio State had 4 in this year, right? I mean, Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana, they had 4 teams in. Anyway, Georgia the SEC had 3, right? You had Tennessee, Texas, and Georgia. And if not for 2 of your teams just peeing down their leg in late season, they'd be in 2 in a 12 team. And I believe one of them would have been in. Who would have been if they went to 14? Let's say it was 14 this year. Who were the next 2 that would have been in, Trev? So it would have been Alabama, and Miami would have been the next 2 teams in a 14-team playoff. So you would have had 4 in anyway with a 9-3 team. You're going to get 4 in a 14-team playoff anyway. So, I mean, I think they should give some concessions because you're going to get those teams anyway. And so that's where I'm at. I think that's what we're going to see. That's where the negotiation is going to be, Trevor. We're going to see an expanded playoff. We're going to see more first-round games because instead of 4 first-round games, there's now a chance that we're going to have 7 first-round games. And then the quarterfinals will be at 8. So it really just impacts the number of teams playing the first round. Once you get past the first round, we're back to 8. And the rest of the playoff is the same as it was. It just means there's one more game in the first round, which, okay, so what? I mean, my whole thing is, if you're going to do that, just go to 16 and everybody plays the first round. But that's the negotiation point, 14 to 16. And I think it'll be at 14 early on is what I'm reading. And then the other big debate is going to be how many automatic bids get in. And then after that, it's okay, conferences, now what are you going to do with your championship games? How are you going to determine who your top 4 teams are going to be coming? I mean, the committee will do it, but what are some of the negotiating points that you have? Hey, look, we don't – because to a degree, you could almost say, hey, we don't want the committee to determine our 4 teams. We'll have the committee seed them, but we're going to have our own tournament to determine who our 4 are. We're going to have our own process for who our 4 are. Our number 1 seed automatically is in. Our number 2 seed is automatically in. And then we'll have a tournament. I mean, you could see some stuff like that start to happen where it erases the conference championship game, and it's truly a play-in type of format, which I think could create some very interesting kind of end of the regular season scenarios where maybe week 12 is, you don't play that extra game and week 12 is the first round of that play in, and then the next round, you kind of have something else. Or instead of you have your 2 at the end of the regular season, you play your conference games, and then on championship Saturday, your 1 and 2 are done, they're in. But now 3 plays 6 and 4 plays 5, and those 2 winners get the automatic bid. The third, or if they only get 3, then 3 and 4 play each other, and the winner gets an automatic bid. And then you're gonna force them like, well, hey, what if we lose? Are we gonna not be are we if there's not 4? But I think that's what you'll see is it gives those teams who maybe otherwise wouldn't get in, number 5 and number 6 who wouldn't get in, now maybe have a chance to play themselves in. That could get interesting to see what they do in response to that, Trevor. I think that is going to help determine how agreeable some people are to this. Is how do you pick those 4? Is it just the committee picking their top 4? Do you still have the conference championship games? That if you go to 14 to 16, I think, Trev, the conference championship games become an even greater burden. You're almost now being punished for being the best in your league.
I do think that it's interesting, the play-in idea, because March Madness does the same thing. They have the little play-in, whatever. You win this game and you get in as a 16 seed, 15 seed, whatever that may be. And I think, one, from a financial standpoint, because like we've talked before, money's the driver of a lot of this. And one of the reasons why they won't let the championship weekends go is because it's a driver of revenue. But if you do it in a format where, hey, we're replacing championship weekend with this little play-in, potentially 2 games, if you get 4 automatic buys, or 1 game where you get 3 automatic buys, I think that can then replace it. The other thing that I like about it is it provides the facet of, look, if you think you should be in, it's not going to be based on what you did in week 6. It's going to be based on what you do right here in this moment. Now, there is some conversation to be had about your success in the regular season will lead you to be able to make you eligible to play in that play-in game. But that's what I loved about the college football playoffs this year. The 2 teams that played in the national championship, Notre Dame's not even in a conference, and Ohio State is in a conference and didn't play for the Big Ten championship game. So those were 2 teams. And then you look at the semifinals. Texas lost their conference championship. They had to play their 16th game in the semifinals. Same thing that Penn State had to do. Mm-hmm. So I like the play-in idea because it gives you the opportunity to find you think that you should be in the playoffs, win this game. Go prove that you believe that you have the right. Because it doesn't matter that you went, call it 4-3 in the SEC, which might be better than another team if their strength of schedule is better, if they have more quality wins. If you think you deserve to be in, here's your opportunity to get in, and which is something that I really like. If they are going to move to that format, it's going to be interesting to see what they do to the regular season. Is that going to be shortened? Because then the conversation will be around, so now we end up having to play more games just to get into the playoffs. It's like, well, had to if you were in a conference anyways. So it opens up a whole different can of worms for discussion, which, to your point, which is why there will be an effect to the regular season. Maybe they don't play 12 regular season games. Maybe it's something where the season doesn't have to start every single year on Labor Day weekend, and they cut out one of the BS games that are played at the beginning. You don't have to go play UL Monroe.
Or maybe
You
they
don't.
start earlier and still continue to play 12, start a little bit earlier, and then you can still have the extra rep. Because like there's a lot of people, Trevor, that are saying you got to get rid of the time off in between the regular season and I'm like, people that say that either like
Good Lord, no.
they didn't play football or they played quarterback. Like I see Joel Klatt saying that's because you played quarterback. If you played D-line, you would not be arguing for this for an 18, 19, 20-year-old to play 12 regular season games, and then 2 weeks or a week later, you're jumping into a potential 4-round playoff thing. I think there's got to be some sort of concession. Do they go back to 11 games? Here's the problem. If you go back to 11 games, you're losing revenue because you're most likely you're going to see teams are going to have less games to play. ESPN's going to have less games to air. Or do you play 11 regular season games, and then the last round is just a seeding for everybody? So like let's say the final week of the regular season is our top 2 teams get byes. They're not playing in, they can play, whatever. I don't know how you would handle that, but you could say like they'll have some game. I don't know. You play one verse. I don't know how you can format. I haven't worked that all through, but the last week is a thing where you say, okay, we're gonna have these teams play this game. At the end of the 12-team regular season. So the first 2 rounds get byes, and then you say, okay, then you have 3, 4, 5, and 6 play in the championship round. Or you could kind of move that to the last game of the regular season, where you could even have your top 8 teams kind of play, or your top 6 teams play, or something like that, where 1 plays 4, 2 plays 3, or something, and then the winners play in championship round. There's all types of ways you can go at it. I don't know what the right scenario is. I'm literally just kind of spitballing here a little bit. But I do think it will have an impact on it, because at this point in time, if I'm the number 1 seeded SEC team, like if you're Texas last year, there was nothing to gain from playing Georgia. Nothing.
No.
You weren't going to be the number 1 seed. The only thing that could happen is you win and you stay put, or you lose and you fall down. And that's exactly what happened to Texas. So it's like we're being punished for being the best teams in our league. We have to play an extra game. It doesn't make sense to do that if you're going to have these automatic bids for X number of teams in your league. You're punishing your top teams. I don't know what the format's going to be. And I also think the thing too, Trevor, and I honestly believe if you're going to go to 14 teams, you might as well go to 16. And I see people saying like, well, there's no need for that. I'm like, it doesn't add it adds no rounds to the playoffs. And what this simply means is if you want to get rid of the conference championship games, then go to 16 teams. And then you can start 2 weeks after the regular season's over with. And you're playing, you can move Army Navy up a week. And now Army Navy can be in, where normally championship weekend is. And then the week after that, you're starting the playoffs. Because if you're going to have all these teams in, then just go to 16, because it doesn't add a round. Because you're going to have 6 games in the first round in a 14-team playoff. And then after those teams win, you're at 8. In a 12-team playoff, you had 4 games. And after all those games were played, you were then to 8. If you go to 16 teams and everybody plays in the first round, then after the games are played, you're at 8. It's still 4 rounds. It's just now you're giving 2 teams a bye. Well, get rid of the byes and just get rid of the championship game, get rid of byes, and then you just have a first-round playoff game. And that would be kind of my thing that I would say could be a little bit of a bonus for those teams. Get rid of your conference. We'll give you extra automatic bids if you get rid of your conference championship game, because that's kind of you're going to get that revenue back by having the extra thing. So you could go to like, in a 6-team, you could go 4 Big Ten, 4 SEC, 2 for the ACC, 2 for the Big 12. That's 12 teams. Then you've got 1 group of 5 team guaranteed to get in. Then you've got 3 automatic bids. Notre Dame will have buy-in. So then you have 2. So there's some years you may get 5 in. Or the third those last 2 could go to the number 3 ACC or the number 3 Big 12 if they're good enough. So I could see something like that, and then you play 4 games. You play 4 games a day, or you could go Friday, Saturday, Sunday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and play. Maybe Thursdays you get 2 night games, and then you get 2 the next night, and then you play 4 on Saturday. I mean, you could figure out how to make that work. where you have the 16, where you have all 16 teams play in. It just literally adds 2 extra games. It doesn't add an extra round. You might as well, and then you don't have to complain as much about, well, how unfair it is if those teams get 4 teams, because if they get 4 seeds and you're in a 14-team playoff, you may only get 1 automatic for the ACC and Big 12, or if you go to the 2 automatics for them, that's now 12. You get the group of 5, then there's 1 at-large bid, and you're going to have Notre Dame already has provisions. If Notre Dame's ranked such and such, they're in. So then there's no at-larges. So there may be years you would otherwise have 5 in a 14 or a 16 where you only get 4 because you capped yourselves. Yeah. So if you're going to go to the 4 automatic bids for the 2 big conferences and then 2 for the others, you might as well go to 16 and now create more at-large situations where a 5th team and the 2 big boys or a 3rd team and the others could get there. And there may be a year where the ACC has 4 or the Big 12 has 4, and they have as many as the other teams because they're the next 2 ranked teams. But years where those leagues are down, they get their 2, and the rest of y'all can go play in some bowl game. And that's how I think the format that I think could work. I would feel a lot more comfortable with the automatic bids for the 2 power conferences at 16 than I would at 14. Because at 14, basically 8 of your 14 are going to be – so over half your teams are going to be from 2 leagues. If you go to 16, there's at least a chance that it's only half. But if it's beyond half, it's because they earned it. If they get 5 teams in there, it's because they earned it. They had 5 teams that were good enough to be in, according to the committee. That's kind of how I look at it, Trevor, and what I think could really work. For this.
You and I are in the same boat here. We talked before the show. I mean, what's 16 if you're already talking about 14? Another selling point too is the top teams would then get home games. Like teams that previously would have received a bye and automatically had to have played at a neutral site location, they now get home games. Look, it's a small sample size. It's 1 year. But you go off of the evidence that you do have, not what the potential for the following year could be. At least that's how I am. And you go through and look at it, and what do you know after this season? All 4 teams that had home games won. All 4 teams that had byes lost. Now, I am no stranger to the fact that it could be completely opposite next year. To be honest with you, I don't think that the home teams are really ever. I think it'll be very rare when a home team in the playoff loses, barring a certain situation. But you go back through, and I don't know if every single year the teams that receive a bye lose, because I don't know if a Boise State's going to get a bye every single year and then have to play Penn State. I don't know if Arizona State's going to receive a bye and then play a neutral site game against Texas in Texas. You know what I mean? So I think I don't think you can count on that every single year. But what I do know is I do think it would be a selling point to some of the upper teams to say, hey, look, why don't we just do away with the bye weeks? Everybody, like, just round 1 starts for everybody, and the top seeds all get home games. Because then you would get to have potentially a playoff game in Athens. Notre Dame will continue to have home playoff games. You could have a home playoff game once again in Columbus. You could have a home playoff game in Eugene. You could have a home playoff game again in Happy Valley. So you could have one down in Tuscaloosa. You could, the list goes on and on. I think that's another added selling point, and just another reason to, at this point, you might as well just go to 16. Adding 2 more teams means you play, 1 more game in comparison to 14?
Well, it'd be 2 more because 2 would have byes, so those 2 would then get opponents, so you'd have 2 extra games. So instead of playing 6 first-round games, I think I said 7 earlier, instead of playing 6 first-round games, you'd have 2 extra games because those 2 teams would then get to play 2 more, because you'd be adding 4 teams into the first round. Mm-hmm. So even though you're only adding 2 teams to the tournament, you're adding 4 to the first round, because since in the 14, 2 teams would get byes.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. I know another question that a lot of people have as well with all this discussion, and it's something that is brought up, especially because we are a show that covers Notre Dame. What does all this mean for Notre Dame? There's a lot of talk about conferences and. Go ahead. Sorry.
I want to talk about something first, Trev, because you said something that's kind of interesting, and you made a comment that very rarely are you going to see a scenario where a home team loses, and I think that you're correct in the current format. because you're going to see, and this is I'm not opposed necessarily to teams that aren't ranked fourth getting the number 4 seed if they are a conference champion. But the reason that I've advocated for, but you got to be ranked in like the top 8 or something, is because you get into see scenarios where teams that are ranked way too low to be getting up into the 4 seed get moved up, which then what it does is it drops teams down. So when you look at like the final rankings, for example, and you had Tennessee, who was the 7 seed, all of a sudden, who in a normal just 1 to 14, 1 to 12 seeding would have been playing SMU at home. Instead, they're dropped on the road, and they've got to play the number 6 team on the road. Whereas if you had more of a true, 1 through 4 gets a bye, but then 5 plays 12, you'd have Notre Dame playing, you'd have Notre Dame playing Arizona State. You would have, Notre Dame would have played Clemson in a 5 and 12. You would have had Ohio State would have then played Arizona State. You would then have number 7 would be Tennessee playing home to SMU, and then number 8 Indiana playing number 9 Boise State. In this particular year, I don't know that any road teams would have won in that format, but thinking forward, there's going to be some years where that 11 seed is Bama or Georgia or Notre Dame, and they're playing the true 6 or the true 7. Because let's say Bama doesn't lose to Oklahoma. They're probably the 10 seed. They're getting their rematch against Tennessee. Maybe they win that game. And a true 8-9 of this year's Indiana Boise. Next year it may be Bama being on. I mean, there was a time when we were projecting it was 9 Bama versus 8 Notre Dame. Remember that? Or 9 Notre Dame playing 8 Bama. In a true seeding, I do think there's a greater chance for more first round road wins in a true seeding.
Fair.
But when you do have teams dropping down below, you're now seeing in Ohio State, SMU's playing a better team than they should have played. And nobody wants to talk about this. SMU has earned the 10 seed in the playoff. They should have been playing Tennessee at home. Instead, they were forced on the road. Instead, they were forced to go on the road and play the number 4 ranked team. And so I think that's what creates some imbalance. Tennessee is the 7 seed, was forced to go on the road and play the 16 or the 7th ranked team was forced to go on the road and play the number 6 ranked team instead of playing at home against somebody else. Sure. And I think if you get proper seeding, then there's a greater chance for some of those 6 through 8s to get knocked off at home because 6 is now 6, not 4. Or, and that's where I think you are correct in the current format. But if you had like if you said, okay, you got to be ranked in the top 8 to get a bye, Boise doesn't get a bye, Arizona State doesn't get a bye. That I can live with that. If you'd have looked at 2023 and let's say that we we looked at the final rankings in 2023 and we looked at teams in the conferences they're in now, Georgia would have got a bye, Michigan would have got a bye. See here. Michigan would have got a bye. Texas would have got a bye. Florida State would have got a bye. And then because they automatic bids, but their next highest ranked conference champion would have been well below that group. And so the 4th seed would have then been Washington, who was the number 2 in the Big Ten. Just looking off of the rankings and what leagues they're in now. I know Washington was in the Pac-12 then, but I'm just trying to point to where they would be now. And so you wouldn't see, who would it be? It would be Missouri, Oklahoma, LSU, Arizona. It'd be Arizona. Would have gone from 14 to 4 in No, you shouldn't do that. Put them at 12. Let them get in because they were the best team in the Big 12. Just looking at who's coming back in the Big 12. All right, fine. They get 12, but they're not going to jump up to 4. And that's I say do it that way. That's why I like if you're going to do that, then let there be a cutoff. You got to be in the top 8 to get a bye in the current 12-team format. But at the end of the day, that's not going to matter for too long because you're going to move to a 14 to 16 moving forward. But that's what I'd say is if you're just going to do this, then just go 1 through 16 and just have an eight game first round, a 4-game second round, a 2-game semifinal, and a one game championship. And then now you've got a much better case for saying, hey, we need to eliminate the conference championships. Well, we need that money. Okay, but you're going to get a home game. So that's your incentive. We'll play those games then as opposed to the conference championship games. Or we'll give you a 4th automatic bid and then kind of go about it that way. That's what I think would make a lot of sense.
No, that does make sense. In changing the format, I absolutely get what you're saying about you could start to see a shift of more home teams getting upset depending on the draw of what the bottom half of those teams are. That absolutely makes sense. The one question that I have, and it's actually a good segue into what does this all mean for Notre Dame? Let's say you do away with conference championship games. Does that then mean, because I know contracts have already been signed, and this is a genuine question, in pertains to Notre Dame, would Notre Dame then be eligible for one of the top 4 buys, or is the criteria still you have to play within a conference? So if conference championships don't weigh as much, what does that mean for Notre Dame?
So my understanding, talking to certain people and then reading what people like Heather Dinich and Bill Bender are reporting, is if they got rid of conference champions get buys and it just goes to pure seeding, then Notre Dame can get a 1 through 4.
Okay.
The whole point of Notre Dame not getting one now is that they don't play in a conference championship game. So it's not fair for them to get a bye when those teams have to play an extra game. Now, Notre Dame's still not playing the extra game, but it's the buys aren't going to conference champions anymore by rule, meaning you can have 2 SEC teams in the top 4, 2 Big Ten teams, and that's what it's going to be most years. It's going to be 2 SEC teams and 2 Big Ten teams, or 2 of those and 1 of the other, and then maybe a Notre Dame sneaks into the top 4. Or like this year, if we were just going top 4, it would have been 2 Big Ten teams and 2 SEC teams, right? It would have been Oregon and Penn State would have gotten buys, and Georgia and Texas would have got buys. That's what it would have been. Notre Dame would have been the 5 seed. But in other years, if Notre Dame is the 4 seed, the 4th ranked team, they'd get the 4th seed. Because you can't say, well, you have to win a championship to get the bye. Well, that's why Notre Dame couldn't get the bye. They couldn't win a championship, couldn't play in a championship. If you get rid of you have to be a champion to get the bye, then there's no reason to keep Notre Dame out. There's no rule to trigger Notre Dame being out. And so my understanding of talking to people is it's just going to be the top 4 teams, no matter what conference or no conference. If Boise State's ranked number 4, they're going to be the number 4 seed. If 3 of the top 4 teams are SEC teams, then the top 3 SEC teams get buys.
Gotcha.
I think there's a chance that happens. I think that's the one thing that could happen this year if the ACC and the Big 12 are smart. They will be willing to concede that if they get some concessions about the number of automatics that are in future tournaments. And if the SEC and Big Ten are smart and savvy and not just greedy, they'll understand, hey, giving up the extra team down the road to get this change for this year isn't going to affect us at all down the road because we're still going to get 4 in. If I'm the Big Ten, I'd say to my, hey, data guy, come here. Go back and look at the last 10 years of college football playoff rankings and tell me if we just went through a pure 1 through 14, how many times would we have not had at least 4 in the playoff? I don't know that exists. Matter of fact, Trevor, you're my data guy. I want you to find that answer out when we're done with the show. Go back in the last 10 years of the college football playoff from 14 to 24. Actually, that'd be 11 years. And find out how many times that they just went through a pure 1 to 14. How many times would there have been fewer than 4 SEC teams or 4 Big Ten teams, including where the league they're in now? So like Washington would count as a Big Ten team last year. That kind of thing. Texas would have counted as an SEC team. That would be the conversation to have. And I think if you go back and look at it, Trevor, they're going to get their 4 anyway. This year they would have got their 4. The SEC especially. Big Ten is a little bit more. There's been years the Big Ten hasn't had 4 teams.
Talking about in a
If you look at
12-team playoff model, you're saying
like
in the
in
last
past years, yeah.
Okay.
Well, a 14. No, because it's more about the 14-team model. Because in the
Okay.
12 they would have had it because they didn't have 4. The SEC didn't have 4 this year. But in the past, if you went to 14 and expanded to 14, they would have been in. The SEC would have 4 every year. I'm confident of that. There's years the Big Ten might not have, even with the additional teams that you're looking at. But I mean, you're still going to see most of those years Big Ten's got at least 3. And now that they've got Oregon and USC and Washington and UCLA, it increases the chances. Like there's years where it's like Penn State, Ohio State, Michigan, and then it's a big drop off between that next team.
Yeah.
You know, there's years where Ohio State's playing like a 8-4 Purdue team in the Big Ten title game, or Michigan did a couple years ago. And I go, okay, yeah, that's there's a big drop between those top 3. But you look at like what was it, 2021, when Michigan State was really good that year. That might have been one of those years where you looked at it and said, hey man, like 2021, you had Michigan was the 2, you had Michigan State was the 10. Actually, no, that year, Michigan was 2, Ohio State was 6, Michigan State was 10, Penn State was down that year. Oregon was 14. So, and then Iowa was 15. So you'd had 4 that year. Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, and who was there for? Bama, Georgia.
That was in 2021. That would have been
Ole
3.
Miss. So that'd be the one year that they did. Who was the next Oklahoma at 16 would have been the next highest ranked team. Mm-hmm. And then your next highest ranked SEC team was 8-4. That's my point. In those years, you shouldn't have a 4th team if that 4th team is 8-4. That's how you cheapen the playoff. But most years you're going to have that. So yeah, I was incorrect. That was a year I was curious about. But Cincinnati was really good. They'd have got a 4 seed on their own. They wouldn't have needed a boost to get in. Notre Dame would have been in. They'd have had to play Pitt in the first round. I'd take that. That team might have actually got a postseason win that year.
Man.
So
the one year that'll be interesting is 2020, because I think that's the one that you have to look at with a little bit of because depending on the conference you played in, you had different number of games.
And you have to be able to look in. Yeah, you have to look and say you can't use the COVID year as a standard for that. But yeah, SEC would have had 1, 5, 6, and 9 were all SEC teams. The Big Ten would have had the 4 seed, the 12 seed, and the 14 seed. But again, that year Northwestern played 6 games, Indiana played 7, USC played 4. It's impossible to look at those years and really have regular season wise and have any say of. I mean, USC went 5-0 that year. Actually, USC would have been in the final rankings. Ohio State would have been 4. You'd have had Indiana at 11, Northwestern at 14, USC at 13. So you'd had 4 Big Ten teams as well. Alabama would have been in, A&M would have been in, Florida would have been in, Georgia would have been in, Oklahoma would have been in. You'd had 5 SEC teams. And I mean, so Clemson would have got in the ACC. The second automatic bid would have been North Carolina at 15. And then the Big 12. Go ahead.
In back-to-back years in 2018 and 2019, the SEC would have had 6 teams in the playoffs, in a 14-team playoff.
Right.
In back-to-back years.
Right. Now, I wonder how that would have been if you do give the 2 automatics to the Big 12 and the ACC. Be curious about that. But to your point, Trev, if you knocked one out, it's still 5. And that's the thing. It's like, look, we'll give you 4, but this would be my negotiation point. We'll give you 4 automatic bids if that's all you can have. Can't have more. Well, if we have 5 worthy, then we want 5. Okay, well then why not go to 3? Because if you have 4 worthy, you're going to get 4. If you have 5 worthy, you're going to get 5. Go to 3, and then we'll all only get 1, and then we can go from there. That's I would much rather see that.
Yeah.
Then no matter what this 3rd ACC team does, they could be ranked higher than the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th SEC teams, but they got no shot of getting in because of the automatic qualifiers. That's that's my thing. Hey, Archer, put that tweet that you're talking about. I don't know what tweet you're talking about. Put that tweet in the chat. I want to take a peek at that because Ross Dellinger's or somebody else who's done some really good reporting on this whole. Ross Dellinger and Heather Dinich, to me, are the two best at reporting kind of where this is. Heather is like she does the interviews, she talks to the people. Ross does a really nice job of breaking down what this means and what the facts are and all that kind of stuff. So they both do a really nice job with that. But so for what it means for Notre Dame, Trevor, you had mentioned before, Notre Dame can get a 1 through 4. I'm also trying to find the specifics, but I don't know if it's Notre Dame's ranked in the top 10 or the top 12. But the Notre Dame has the new contract that starts in 2026. Notre Dame has an automatic trigger that they're in, where if they're ranked, I don't know if it's top 10 or top 12, they're in. It doesn't matter if they're ahead of the, if they're wherever they're ranked and the number 3 Big Ten and number 4 SEC teams are ahead of them, doesn't matter. It's taking away it's taking away one of the at-large. So it doesn't matter where those other teams are ranked. There's no scenario in which if Notre Dame's in that range that a 3rd or a 4th Big Ten or a 3rd or 4th SEC knocked them out. What they would do is they would take one of the at-large bids away. So if you'd still have your 4 automatic bids from the Big Ten, you'd have your 4 from the SEC, you'd have your 2 ACC bids, and you'd have your 2 Big 12 bids in this scenario 4-4-2-2 and 1. So the 4 SEC, 4 Big 10, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12, 1 group of 5. So that's 8, 10, that's 13 teams. So then Notre Dame would get that one remaining at large if they rank in a certain level. If Notre Dame is outside of that ranking and a 5th team from the Big 10 or SEC is ahead of them, or a 3rd ACC, 3rd Big 12, or a 2nd group of 5 is ahead of them, then that's how Notre Dame gets knocked out. But Notre Dame can't go from, I think it's 12. Somebody could look this up. I think it's 12, but they're not going to go from 12th out because the 3rd and 4th SEC or 2nd Big 12 or 2nd ACC knocks them out. There just would be no other at-larges. But that's also why I think the idea of if you're going to give them 4, then go to 16. Because now we have a shot. Because there's going to be years where the 5th best Big Ten team is better than the 4th best SEC team. And they're not going to get a shot to play for the championship. Or the 5th best SEC team is better than the 2nd best ACC team or Big 12 team, which could happen more often than not, especially with the Big 12 and the ACC the way they are right now. So if you're going to give them 4, then I think you need to definitely go to 16. Now there's 3 at-larges. Because there's a scenario where if Notre Dame is entrenched in that, if they're ranked like this year, then literally there's all 12 spots are going to automatic bids in a 14-team playoff. 4 Big Tens, 4 SECs, 2 ACCs, 2 Big 12s, the group of 5, and Notre Dame, all automatic bids. There's no decision-making to be made except where they're going to rank. I think that takes out some of the fun for me, whereas in this form, if you go to 16, there's still 2 teams that still have a shot. And if Notre Dame's not good, then they would go in. I would also, if I was the Power 4, I would kind of come together on one thing and say, hey, look, group of 5, we want you to be part of this, but you got to be ranked in the top 15 to get in. You lose your spot if you're not ranked in the top. If you're not ranked in the top, I'd probably go higher than that because then the committee could play some games and, force them down below. But you got to be at least X number of wins, and you've got to be ranked in at least a certain spot is what I would do. So that's kind of where I would do is if you're going to give the 4 automatics, I think you need to go to 16. That way there's more at large going around. I mean, because like if your 4 Big Ten teams are locked in by week 10, then what's there to play for in the last 2-3 weeks of the regular season? That's how you can make the regular season not be a whole lot of fun.
Yeah, that's fair. No, that's fair. Well, Bryan, anything else to add about the new changes that could potentially come into the college football playoff?
I just hope they do it right, man. I hope that at some point in time, the leadership, and it's this wishful thinking, says, hey, look, we got to look out what's best for the league. The Big Ten commissioner has to look out for what's best for the Big Ten, the SEC, but at the same point in time, if the rest of the game suffers, we ultimately will suffer. And that they're, hey, look, we're going to go, there's a certain point we won't cross because we think we're going to then do irreparable damage to the entire game. And that our greed's not going to be such that we just don't care about everybody else. We don't care if the ACC goes away or the Big 12 goes away. That's not our problem. That's a dangerous game that could then end up saying, okay, now you're going to suffer because you didn't care about everybody else. Now you're going to suffer. And I just hope that there's some level of just maturity and really, hey, look, yeah, we got to still look out what's best for the game. And yeah, it's good we're going to be making money, but we got to look out what's best for the game to a degree. There's got to be a balance there. I mean, you're the SEC commissioner. You should never put what's best for the entire sport over what's best for your league completely. You just have to say, I'm going to do what's best for my league up until a point. I mean, what's best for your league is to ask for 8 teams. Well, okay, that's that. I mean, if the Big Ten and the ACC really wanted it, they could ask for 5, 6, 7. I mean, if we're being honest, they could ask for even more. But just don't. Just say, look, we're going to go here, and then here's the concession we'll give to you to make it better. You know, we'll do different things. I think that's going to be a big thing. And I'm curious to see what it does to in-season scheduling, because my whole thing is then how do teams react to it? I believe that if you're smart, you're going to say, well, look, we just got to finish in the top 4 in our league and we're in, which means we can play better out of conference to give ourselves a challenge to be or do they say, well, it doesn't matter who we play out of conference. If we play 4 cream puffs out of conference, it doesn't matter as long as we finish top 4. There's going to be teams that take very different views on that. And I think the teams that are going to win more often than not are the teams that are going to look at it and say, hey, you know, our schedule's not super hard in 2025. Let's go try and schedule Notre Dame, or let's go try and schedule a good Big 12 team, or let's go try and schedule a good ACC team or a good SEC team, because we didn't get Ohio State, Michigan, or Oregon on a schedule this year. Yeah. So we need to, you know, yeah, we could schedule ourselves into the playoff, but then we get our butt kicked in the first round. We're not going to make as much, you know what I mean? And we're not going to have as much of a chance to play for championship. So that'll be interesting, is how they go with that. It'd be very interesting. I'm not sure what they're going to do, but I just hope that there's something to that. But I do like the fact that Notre Dame has negotiated protections in this new deal, which means from 26 to 35. Isn't that the length of the
like
new
10
one?
seasons? Yeah.
Yeah. Notre Dame is guaranteed to be in. So the leagues are going to force them out. As long as this new contract goes through, which it pretty much is, it just has to get worked out the details. Notre Dame's got a 10-year period where the leagues can't force them out. The only thing they could do is say, well, we're not going to schedule them, but Notre Dame's going to be able to schedule enough with the ACC deal that they can get in the top 12 every year. Notre Dame goes 12-0 every year, playing 6, 7 ACC teams, Navy, and then 2 MAC teams and one big, and they're 12-0, they're still in. So you tried to, but you know, they're still in, and now they haven't been battled in a while, and you better hope that they're not as beat up in November as you better hope you're not beat up in November, because they won't be when you play them in the playoff. You know, I mean, so that we can at least stop talking about that for a while, them being forced into a league for a while, because there are protections for Notre Dame to be in the tournament for that 10 years starting in 2026.
My only hope out of this expanded playoff talk is you cap it at 16, and it never goes more than that. That is my one hope.
Because anything, reduce.
Yes, make 16 the cap. Because look, I've heard some conversation around, like, what if you went to 16 teams this past season, and 1 plays 16 and 2 plays 15, so on and so forth. This year, you actually would have gotten some interesting games, if I'm just being honest with you. I mean, Georgia would have hosted South Carolina. Texas would have hosted Ole Miss. Penn State would have hosted Miami. So there would have been some interesting matchups in there.
Oregon would have played Clemson in the first round. Notre Dame would have played Arizona State. Ohio State would have played Bama in a 16-team playoff.
But then my reason for hoping that that's where it caps is because anything after that, you start worrying about the product on the field. not being
Yes.
good. You're going to start talking. I mean, you don't want Iowa State going to Athens and playing Georgia. That would not have been a good game. At least I don't believe so. You start getting into the further down that you go. You start talking about, Missouri going and playing Ohio State in the Horseshoe. That would not have been a good game. And so at least I don't believe to be so. So I hope that they learn their lesson. And because there's always that, we saw it in the 14 playoff. Teams 5, 6, 7, well, we could have been in and competed. In the 12-team playoff, teams 13 through 15. No, we could have been in and competed. And you're going to get more of it. Whenever you are call it 1 to 3 seeds outside of the playoff, it's like, well, why did they get to get in and we could have competed? And so to your
point,
they
wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm.
That go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah, so to your point, and I say all of that to say you have to put the forefront of the product on the field at mind first, not just, well, let's just make this thing as big as possible, because it's not college basketball. It won't work out that way. You're not going to have that Cinderella story 14 seed make it to the Elite Eight. It won't happen.
Not in football. Not in football. That's why you don't see that. You don't see that. There's certain sports where you're just not big, strong, fast enough to there's just a bigger gap between, the number 1 team in college football is a whole lot different than the number 32 team in college basketball. College football. Than the number 1 team in college basketball is compared to the number 32 team in college basketball. And women's basketball is like that too. There's a much greater gap between that's why you don't see, I'd be curious to kind of look at the women's Final Four and find out when was the last time that you saw a really low-seeded team make a run, because you just don't see it very often because there's just bigger gaps. Football's like that. So this isn't necessarily a male versus female thing, because football's that way. You're just not going to see that. And it's the same way in Division III. It's the same way at all levels. Mount Union's never getting upset in the first round by some, team that's not any good. So, that's kind of my thing, Trevor, is I think that's a great point. I think 16's too much, but here's my hope, and here's what I'll be rooting for the first 5, 6, 7 years of the NCAA tournament. I hope that the road teams get destroyed year after year after year after year unless they're Notre Dame. Because if we just constantly see these lower-seeded teams just constantly getting curb stomped year after year after year after year, then you're going to see maybe when we get to 2035, there's conversation about reduction. Let's make the bowl games more impactful. Let's do different things. But these teams have these teams could be going to bowl games and winning and actually getting some valuable experience than going and getting their brains beat in the first round of the playoff every year. And that's what I'm actually going to be hoping for. I don't want chaos, because I want the playoff to go back to being smaller. And I think the only way that happens is if you just got your first, because here's why I say that. It's not just because, they get beat. But if the first 4 or 5 years, the first round of the playoff is just blowout after blowout after blowout, what eventually happens, Trevor? People stop watching the first round. Except for fans of those teams, they stop watching the first round. Well, I don't really tune in. I know a lot of people like that with the NCAA tournament. I'm like that now. I used to watch, dude, I would literally take the day off the first couple days of the NCAA tournament. And I would just watch 11 o'clock in the morning till that night. I was watching tournament games between teams I had no clue about. I loved the NCAA tournament. After a while, and not because something the NCAA tournament did wrong, like, they added the fourth. I stopped caring as much about it. I became more of a normie when it comes to college basketball. I loved college basketball. Now I'm more of just a normie fan. I don't start watching until the Sweet 16, sometimes Elite 8, Final Four. And that's what's going to happen to college football. If the blowouts, if the first round keeps looking like this year, which I think it will, even a true seeding, you're rarely going to get that really good Bama-Ohio State matchup.
Yeah.
Because if Bama is playing Ohio State, the lower seeded team wasn't a typical Bama team, more often than not. And, what's to say Bama, who lost to Tennessee, wouldn't have got smoked by Ohio State even worse?
Yeah.
I actually think that would have happened. So, because at least Tennessee could play defense to some degree, Ohio State would have just annihilated that Alabama defense. I mean, look what Michigan did to them. I mean, look what Michigan did to them. You know what I mean?
Look what Oklahoma did to them. I mean,
exactly.
Look, man.
Exactly.
Look.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the point is if we see a lot of those, then people start tuning out the first round.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's no longer advantageous financially to have these first round games. It costs us X amount of dollars for the NCAA to put on these games. Teams are getting a cut of the sales, and we're not getting and then if you're ESPN, you're like, dude, we don't want to air those first round games anymore. I mean, look at the ratings for these. Nobody cared about watching, let's find one of those nobody cared about watching Georgia against South Carolina. SEC people did. Nobody cared about watching Texas and Ole Miss or Penn State and Miami. Actually, might have been nobody's going to tune in outside of Notre Dame and Arizona State fans to watch Notre Dame and Arizona State. Let's be honest about that.
Yeah.
It's just not going to happen. I mean, the Indiana Boise rankings would be abysmal. The Tennessee SMU ratings would be abysmal. So it just that's the reality of it, Trev, is just when you look at it, it's just if those ratings are just kind of bad, then people will stop caring. Like would anybody have cared about the Louisville Washington game in 2023 in the first round? No. Now, occasionally you'll have this number 1 Michigan against number 16 Notre Dame, which is what the ranking would have been last year. Okay, that might have been interesting. But would anybody cared about the Texas-Arizona game or a rematch of Alabama-LSU outside of those two fan bases? I don't think so. A rematch between Georgia and Ole Miss, a rematch of Ohio State-Penn State, Oregon-Missouri. Does anybody care about any of those games? Like, been there, done that. So, that's the thing. And sometimes those first-round games could be rematches of conference championship games, depending on how the seeding goes. So,
you brought up
go ahead.
You brought up another really good point about this made me think about like rematches, an Alabama LSU rematch. The more and more the SEC and the Big Ten fight for automatic bids, the more and more you increase your chances of your own teams eliminating your own teams. Like you do, because it's not going to work out as well. It's a higher chance. I'm not going to say that in the first round you have 2 SEC teams playing each other and 2 to 3, 4 Big Ten teams playing each other, but it increases those chances if you start pushing your odds to, hey, we should get 5, we should get 6. That's why I think it's all just a little bit silly. I really do. But it's where we're at. It's the day and age of where we're at right now, man.
Yeah, it is. It is. If they do it right, I think it could be good.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I'm not a big fan of an expanded playoff, if they do it right, I do think this could be really good. I just don't have a lot of faith that the leadership in college football is going to do it right because they haven't shown us that so far. Yeah. It's like I hear this. Well, the this year's playoff wasn't as good. I'm like, what are you talking about? I love this year's playoff. Well, there's this block, guys. That's going to happen all the time. Like, just prepare yourselves for that. Have you watched the NFL like ever? I remember watching the Broncos when they won the Super Bowl in 1998. I mean, they played the Jaguars and the Dolphins in the first 2, and they beat the Jaguars like 42-17 and the Dolphins 38-3. Like, did you see what the Bills did to the Broncos this year in the play? Like, guys, that's football. The best teams are always going to dominate inferior teams in the first and second round of the playoff. It's just going to happen. So it's not something like you already had a narrative about what you wanted, and now you're taking the data and you're fitting it into your narrative as opposed to, a real analysis. I mean, I watched the Super Bowl. There wasn't a playoff game in the first round that was more boring than the Super Bowl.
No, that was a bad game. That was a bad game. I agree. And you could take the example of just the Final 4 games. If it was still a 4-team playoff, I can't tell you the last time a 4-team playoff had one game that was a game-winning field goal where the other team picked off the team driving with an opportunity to win to get them into field goal range or help set that up. And then the other semifinal game, you needed an 83-yard fumble recovery for a touchdown to ice the game. Tell me the last time that happened in a 4-team playoff. But in early rounds, that always happens.
March Madness pulls insane numbers, even though almost every year, outside of the exception of the very rare occasions, number 1 seeds absolutely boat race number 16 seeds. Number 2 seeds absolutely work 15 seeds. People still watch it. I'm with you. I was a big fan of the expanded playoffs this year. Big fan.
Agree. And what it did for the regular season in November, I thought was really good. And that's something that I'm sure somebody's done this, but I'd be very curious to see what overall ratings were like in November compared to past years. Be very curious to see that. And anyway, that's good. We're going to go to the mailbag next, folks. So if you have some questions, we don't have a whole lot right now. If you have some questions, go ahead and get those questions in now, and we will dive into it. So go ahead and go ahead and wrap
you got
this
it.
one.
You got it. We're getting ready to dive into the mailbag here, folks. Get your questions in, get your comments, concerns in here. But before we get there, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Whichever platform you watch this on, whether it be Spotify Podcasts or Apple Podcasts, we'd really appreciate a 5-star review. And give the Champions Lounge a look. It's over on the premium message boards, boards@irishbreakdown.com. All of these conversations that we've had today and more are currently happening over there. So you can find all that at boards.irishbreakdown.com.